Get out. Security, escort this man out now, Derek, the loan manager commanded, his voice sharp enough to slice through the tense air of the bank lobby. The security guards advanced, hands hovering near their belts, as David, a black man in a simple suit, calmly raised a hand. I simply requested to speak with a manager about my loan application, he explained, his voice a stark contrast to Derek's aggressive tone. I have not raised my voice or been confrontational in any way. We don't give loans to frauds and people like you, Derek insisted, his own voice rising. You're causing a disturbance. Before the guards could reach him, an event unfolded that would irrevocably alter the course of everyone's career in that room. It was a moment of pure karma, born from an executive's decision to see his own company through the eyes of the people it was failing. David Gaston had built an empire from the ground up. He was the son of working-class parents who, back in the 1980s, had been denied loans 7 times while trying to start a small business. David had promised himself that if he ever held the power to enact change, things would be different. Now, as the founder and CEO of Meridian Financial, with over 200 branches nationwide, his name adorned skyscrapers. His face graced the covers of business magazines, and his story was a case study in business schools. But on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon, David was just another customer. Inside a small convenience store in his old Westwood neighborhood, he wore casual clothes, jeans, a sweater, and a face mask. No tailored suit, no security detail, no executive car idling at the curb. As he reached for a carton of milk, a conversation from the next aisle caught his ear. Even Meridian turned me down, a man said, frustration lacing every syllable. They claim to be community-focused. I did everything they asked for. It's always the same story, another voice replied, heavy with disappointment. They find any excuse. My credit is excellent. My business plan is solid. I have collateral. What more do they want? David froze, his hand suspended in midair. He carefully placed the milk in his basket and moved closer, feigning interest in a nearby shelf. I brought all my documentation, the first man continued. Tax returns, projections, everything. The loan officer at Meridian barely looked at it before saying I didn't qualify. Then I watched a white guy walk in after me and get approved for a similar amount in half the time. Same thing happened to my cousin at their downtown branch, the second man added. It's like they have a quota for us, and that's their diversity filled for the month. It's the same old prejudice, just hidden behind fancy mission statements. And the worst part is, the bank is owned by a black man. David's chest tightened. He peered around the corner to see 2 well-dressed black men in their 30s, their faces etched with a familiar weariness. You know what's worse? The taller man said. Meridian was supposed to be different. Their founder, that Gaston guy, is always giving speeches about financial equality. All talk, his friend scoffed. Just marketing to make people feel good about where they bank. Same discrimination, fancier building. David quietly slipped away, his mind racing. Was this happening in his bank? Under his watch? The very institution he had created to solve this exact problem? He remembered standing in the empty building that would become Meridian's first branch 20 years earlier. Full of idealism, he had pointed to architectural plans and promised his investors, "This bank will be different. We will serve everyone equally, regardless of race or background." My parents couldn't get a loan because of the color of their skin. Not in our bank. Never in our bank. That evening, back in his executive office, David stared at the framed mission statement on his wall, "Financial opportunity for all communities." The words seemed to mock him. The reports on his desk, loan approval rates, customer satisfaction surveys, suddenly felt hollow. "Sir, is everything all right?" his assistant asked from the doorway. "Cancel all my meetings for tomorrow," he said, his voice low. "Even the Federal Reserve Roundtable?" she asked, alarmed. "Everything," he confirmed. "I need to see this for myself." The next morning, David sat in an unfamiliar apartment as a theatrical makeup artist meticulously transformed his appearance. Thicker glasses replaced his designer frames. Subtle facial hair altered his jawline. The artist added blemishes to his normally flawless complexion and altered the appearance of his cheekbones. His hand-tailored suit was replaced with ill-fitting khakis and a button-down shirt. Finally, he practiced his posture, rounding his shoulders, making himself smaller, adopting the hesitant stance of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Remember, the artist instructed, don't make direct eye contact for too long. People who are used to being ignored tend to look away first. 4 hours later, the man who emerged looked nothing like the CEO whose portrait hung in every Meridian branch. He was just another customer, about to experience his own bank from the other side of the counter. With a loan application in hand, under a different name but with his actual impeccable financial qualifications, he headed for Meridian's flagship branch downtown. The building stood as a monument to success, all gleaming glass and polished marble. David adjusted his jacket and pushed through the revolving doors. Inside, he immediately saw a senior representative, Samantha, greeting a well-dressed white man. "Mr. Kensington, so wonderful to see you again," she exclaimed warmly. "How was your daughter's graduation? Harvard, wasn't it?" The man beamed. "Yes, political science, following in her old man's footsteps." Samantha guided him across the lobby. "Derek will take excellent care of you. He's already pulled your information and has set aside a full hour to discuss those investment options." David observed the interaction, noting the attentive posture, the eye contact, the prioritization, the very standard he had written into the company training manual. He then approached the reception desk where another employee, Alicia, was typing. He stood for nearly 30 seconds before she looked up, her gaze brief and dismissive. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly. "Yes, I have an appointment to discuss a business loan," David replied, his voice softer than its usual authoritative tone. "The name is Williams. David Williams." Alicia glanced at her computer, then slid a clipboard of forms across the counter without looking up. "Fill this out and bring it back. Someone will be with you when they're available." "My appointment was for 10:30, David noted politely. It was 10:32. "We're running behind," she said, her eyes still fixed on her screen. David took a seat and began to fill out the paperwork. Across from him sat a young black couple who had clearly been waiting for some time. Over the next 20 minutes, David observed a painful pattern. 3 white customers entered after him. All were greeted promptly and escorted to loan officers within minutes. A white woman with no appointment was immediately seen. Meanwhile, David and the young couple waited. Through a glass partition, he saw Derek Thompson, a senior loan officer he himself had presented with a performance award last month, laughing with Mr. Kensington. Derek's body language was expansive and confident. At one point, he slapped the desk in excitement. "That's exactly the kind of growth potential we love to see," his voice carried across the lobby. "With your background, this approval is practically guaranteed." After 28 minutes, Alicia finally called his name. "Mr. Williams, Derek can see you now." The young couple exchanged a look of frustration. As David approached the desk, Derek's demeanor instantly shifted. The smile he'd offered Mr. Kensington vanished. He didn't stand or make eye contact, simply gesturing toward the chair. "Have a seat," he said. "Williams, is it?" "Yes, David Williams," David replied, extending a hand. Derek hesitated for a noticeable moment before giving it a brief, limp shake. Derek scanned the application, his eyebrows raising slightly at the financial figures, the very same figures that, under the name David Gaston, would have commanded VIP treatment. "You're applying for a business expansion loan of $100,000, he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "That's correct," David said calmly, opening a meticulously prepared portfolio. "My business has been profitable for 8 consecutive years. The portfolio includes my business plan, financial projections, and collateral." Derek barely glanced at the comprehensive plan, flipping through the pages without reading them. "Consulting, huh?" he said, setting the portfolio aside. "And where did you say you got your business experience?" The question was designed to undermine, not to inform. "As noted in my overview, I have an MBA from Northwestern and 15 years of executive experience at 2 Fortune 500 companies," David replied. Derek's eyebrow twitched. "Northwestern? Interesting choice." The implication was clear. "Yes," David added, watching him carefully. "Full scholarship." In those first few moments, before a single substantive financial detail had been discussed, the verdict had already been rendered. David could see it in Derek's dismissive posture, in the subtle curl of his lip, in the assumptions already made. This was not the Meridian Financial he had built. This was a different world entirely. Through the glass, he could see the young couple still waiting, their hopes slowly dimming under the weight of a prejudice that was supposed to have been history. We have several options that might be more appropriate for your situation. I'd be interested to hear what makes them more appropriate than what I've applied for, David replied, his voice a study in composure. Vivian slid a glossy brochure across the desk. It advertised Meridian's Community Business Builder Loan program. A product with interest rates 3.5% higher than standard business loans, shorter repayment terms, and more restrictive conditions, David thought, the irony a bitter taste in his mouth. This program is specially designed for entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds, she explained, emphasizing certain words in a way that left no doubt about their intended meaning. The qualification requirements are more flexible. It was a sanitized way of steering minority applicants towards less favorable terms, a practice he'd been assured would never happen at his company. I believe my qualifications exceed the requirements for your standard business expansion loan, David noted calmly. Why would I choose a product with higher interest rates and more restrictive terms? Derek cleared his throat, reclaiming control of the conversation. Mr. Williams, banking is a complex world. People from your background, well, they often don't understand financial responsibility the same way established business owners do. These specialized products provide guardrails while you build creditworthiness. The statement hung in the air, a piece of naked discrimination thinly veiled as fatherly advice. David felt his pulse quicken, but his exterior remained a mask of calm. My credit score is 815, David replied evenly. I've never missed a payment on any obligation in my life. My business has been profitable every quarter since its inception. What exactly about my background suggests I don't understand financial responsibility? Derek shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. I'm speaking in generalities, of course, but realistic expectations are important. A loan of this size, it's substantial. He changed the subject abruptly, his eyes scanning David's attire. By the way, that's a nice suit, custom made. The implication was clear. How could someone like David afford such things? Department store, David said. I believe in living below my means to reinvest in my business. As the financial statements show, I take a modest salary despite our significant profits. Derek nodded, his expression condescending. Admirable. But let me be direct, Mr. Williams. Loans like this require extensive scrutiny. The approval committee will want to know why you need such a large amount and whether you truly understand the obligation you're taking on. The business plan details exactly how every dollar will be allocated, David countered, pulling specific pages from the portfolio. As you can see here, we've secured contracts that will generate an estimated $1.2 million in new revenue within 18 months, more than enough to cover the repayment schedule. Derek barely glanced at the documents. Instead, he leaned back and steepled his fingers, a power pose David recognized from countless negotiation seminars. Let's be honest, Mr. Williams, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Someone like you is statistically a flight risk on a loan of this magnitude. The bank has to protect its interests. The room fell silent. The insult hung between them like a noxious gas. David felt a surge of pure anger, but he channeled it, sharpening it into a single, deliberate question. His voice was perfectly measured. I'm curious, Mr. Thompson, David said slowly. What exactly do you mean by someone like me? The question was direct, unavoidable. It forced Derek to either explain his bias or retreat. His eyes flicked nervously toward Vivian, who suddenly found the contents of her notepad fascinating. I'm referring to credit demographics, Derek stammered, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. Statistical risk categories. It's nothing personal. I see, David said, his gaze unwavering. And which demographic factors are influencing your assessment of my application, my perfect credit score, my 8 years of consistent business success, my secured contracts, my significant collateral, or is there another factor you're considering? Derek's discomfort was now palpable. He shuffled papers, took a long sip of water, anything to buy a moment. Mr. Williams, you're misunderstanding. We have a responsibility to our depositors to evaluate all risks. Your application will be given the same consideration as any other. The lie was so transparent it was almost comical. David had personally watched Derek practically pre-approve Mr. Kensington for a similar amount just an hour earlier, based on far less documentation. So you're saying the fact that I'm black has no bearing on your skepticism? David asked, the question landing like a grenade in the fragile pretense of the meeting. Derek's face flushed a deep crimson. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. That's... I never... We don't... He finally sputtered. Race is absolutely not a factor in our lending decisions. That would be illegal and against Meridian's policies. David nodded slowly. I'm relieved to hear that. In that case, let's return to my application and discuss its specific business merits, shall we? Derek didn't realize it, but David was offering him a final chance at redemption, a chance to correct his course, to do his job, to treat him with the respect any applicant deserved. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. What began as subtle prejudice had now crystallized into something hard and tangible. Let's continue reviewing your application, Mr. Williams, Derek said stiffly, pulling the folder closer. You mentioned supply chain optimization. That's a competitive sector. What specific value does your company offer that established firms don't? It was the first legitimate business question Derek had asked, but his tone was that of a prosecutor seeking a flaw. We specialize in mid-market companies, the ones typically overlooked by the larger consulting firms, David explained, turning to a specific page in his business plan. His command of the material was absolute, his technical explanation delivered with an expertise that would impress any seasoned financial professional. Derek's expression tightened. He'd clearly expected a less sophisticated response. His eyes darted across the figures, searching for a weakness and finding none. These projected returns seem optimistic, he managed, though the documented history in the plan clearly supported them. Through the glass walls of the office, David saw a middle-aged white couple being shown to another loan officer's desk. The contrast was stark. They were greeted with warm smiles, handshakes, and offers of coffee. Their loan officer leaned forward, nodding enthusiastically as they spoke. Derek followed David's gaze, and his demeanor hardened. If you'd like to apply for a smaller loan, he suggested, changing tactics, perhaps we could expedite the process. Say, $10,000 to start? That would be more realistic for a first-time applicant. I'm not a first-time applicant, David corrected him calmly. As my documentation shows, I've successfully managed business credit lines up to $500,000 with a perfect repayment history. The $100,000 I'm requesting is, in fact, conservative. Derek's irritation was becoming obvious. His client wasn't conforming to the stereotype he had constructed. With every attempt to undermine the application, David responded with precise, undeniable facts. Vivian leaned over and whispered something to Derek. Though her voice was low, David's keen hearing caught every word. We're backed up. Harrison needs help with the Wilsons' jumbo mortgage. Derek nodded subtly, then glanced at his watch with theatrical concern. Mr. Williams, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think we've covered enough for today. I'll submit this for committee review, which typically takes 7 to 10 business days. That's interesting, David replied. I noticed Mr. Kensington was told his approval was practically guaranteed during his initial consultation. Is there a different review process for certain clients? The observation landed like a slap. Every situation is different, Derek said dismissively. Mr. Kensington has a long-standing relationship with our bank. I see, David nodded. And how does one establish such a relationship if applications are treated differently from the very start? Derek's patience had evaporated. He shuffled his papers, a familiar delaying tactic. Look, he muttered to Vivian, not realizing David could hear him perfectly. We're wasting time on this lowlife when we have real clients waiting. He looks like a fraud. The slur hung in the air. David felt a genuine tremor of anger, but he contained it, allowing only a flicker of reaction to show he had heard. I'd like to speak with your manager, please, David said, his voice calm but firm. Derek's eyes widened. He hadn't expected to be overheard. His embarrassment quickly soured into defiance. The branch manager doesn't have time for people who can't qualify for basic loans, he said coldly. I've told you the process. If you're not satisfied, perhaps another bank would be a better fit. The dismissal was now absolute. I believe I have the right to speak with a manager about my application and your conduct, David stated, remaining seated. I'll wait. Derek's composure finally cracked. I'm not going to argue with you, he snapped, standing so abruptly his chair rolled backward. This meeting is over. David didn't move. I'll wait for the manager. Thank you. Derek's face was now a blotchy red. Security? He called out, his voice loud enough to carry through the glass. A young guard named Thomas approached the office door, his hand instinctively going to his radio. Is there a problem, Mr. Thompson? He asked, his eyes darting between the visibly agitated banker and the perfectly calm man in the chair. Mr. Williams is being confrontational and refuses to leave, Derek lied, the reality of the scene directly contradicting his words. Please escort him out. Thomas hesitated. Sir, he said, addressing David respectfully, I'll have to ask you to come with me. I've simply requested to speak with a manager about my loan application, David explained calmly to the guard. I have not raised my voice or been confrontational in any way. He's causing a disturbance, Derek insisted, his own voice the only one raised in the room. Thomas looked deeply uncomfortable, but years of conditioning won out. Sir, I need you to come with me now, he said, his tone apologetic. Please don't make this difficult. David stood slowly, gathering his documents with deliberate care. I understand you're just doing your job, Thomas. I will go with you, but I want it on record that I'm being removed for requesting to speak with a manager after experiencing discriminatory treatment. Don't listen to him, Derek cut in. He's just angry he didn't qualify. We see this all the time. As Thomas escorted David toward the main entrance, they passed the loan officer who was helping the white couple. With your qualifications, the officer was saying enthusiastically, we could actually approve up to $200,000. The rates are excellent right now. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. What Derek Thompson couldn't possibly imagine was that his career at Meridian Financial was now measured in minutes. The man being escorted out of the building was not just any applicant. He was the founder and CEO of the entire organization, and the security cameras had silently recorded every last word. The walk through the Meridian Financial lobby felt endless. David Gaston, disguised as David Williams, was being escorted out of his own bank like a common criminal. For many watching, it was an all-too-familiar scene. For David, it was the devastating confirmation of his worst fears. The young security guard, Thomas, kept a respectful distance. I'm sorry about this, sir, he whispered. I'm just doing what I'm told. David gave a slight nod. As they approached the grand entrance, he pulled out his phone. I need to make a quick call before I leave, he told Thomas. It will only take a moment. Thomas hesitated, glancing back toward Derek, who was watching them with an impatient glare. Sir, my instructions are to escort you outside. 1 minute, David said, his tone subtly shifting, a hint of the authority he normally wielded bleeding through. That's all I need. Something in David's demeanor, a quiet confidence completely at odds with the situation, made Thomas pause. He gave a slight nod. 1 minute. David dialed a number from memory, a direct line that bypassed all switchboards. 20 floors above them, in Meridian's executive headquarters, Eleanor Matthews, executive vice president and David's most trusted colleague, answered her private phone. Eleanor Matthews. Eleanor, it's David, he said. I'm downstairs in the main branch. I need you here, now. No explanation was needed. In 15 years, he had never made such a request. On my way, she replied, already on her feet. David ended the call and turned to Thomas. Thank you for your patience. I believe things are about to change. Just then, Derek stormed across the lobby, his face a mask of fury. I thought I was clear, he snapped at Thomas. Remove this man from the premises immediately. Before the guard could respond, David reached up and peeled away the subtle prosthetic facial hair. The adhesive released, revealing the familiar firm jawline from Meridian's annual reports. Next, he removed the glasses and tucked them into his pocket. He stood taller, his posture shifting from the unassuming applicant to the commanding CEO his employees knew so well. Derek stared, his anger giving way to a profound confusion. What do you think you're doing? He stammered. David didn't answer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his actual ID badge, executive level, with a distinctive gold border. The main entrance doors burst open. Eleanor Matthews strode in, her purposeful gait earning her the nickname the Hurricane among Meridian staff. Her eyes scanned the lobby, found David, and then locked onto Derek. Stop everything, right now, she commanded, her voice cutting through the hushed murmur of the bank. Every head turned. Mr. Thompson, I presume? She asked, her tone glacial. Derek nodded dumbly, his mind struggling to process the scene. Eleanor addressed the entire branch, her voice clear and ringing. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? I need to make something absolutely clear. This man, she declared, gesturing to David, is David Gaston, the founder and CEO of Meridian Financial. The words landed like a shockwave. A gasp echoed across the marble floor. Derek Thompson's face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Beside him, Vivian grabbed a desk for support. That's not possible, Derek finally managed to whisper. Mr. Gaston is standing right in front of you, Eleanor finished for him. The man you just called a lowlife. The man you refused a fair hearing. The man you had security escort out of his own bank. David stepped forward, his transformation complete. He was no longer David Williams, the hopeful entrepreneur. He was David Gaston, and this was his company. He gestured to a tiny, nearly invisible lens pinned to his lapel. This entire interaction, he stated, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority, has been recorded. Along with the bank's own security footage, we now have a comprehensive record of what transpired here today. An absolute silence fell over the branch, a heavy, tangible quiet that seemed to press down on everyone within. Customers stood frozen, witnesses to a scene that would be seared into their memories forever. Employees exchanged glances, a creeping horror dawning in their eyes as the full implications of the moment became clear. The color had drained from Derek's face, leaving behind a pallid, sickly gray as recognition finally pierced through the minimal disguise. Mr. Gaston, there's been a terrible misunderstanding, he stammered, his voice quavering. If I had only known it was you. That is precisely the point, Mr. Thompson, David cut in, his voice as cold and sharp as glass. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat someone with dignity. The fact that my identity would have changed your behavior only proves the very rottenness of what happened here. Eleanor stepped forward, her expression a mask of professional composure barely containing a furious fire. Mr. Gaston has been receiving complaints about this branch for months, she announced, her voice ringing through the silent lobby. Allegations of discriminatory lending, of steering qualified minority applicants toward predatory loans. Today, he decided to see it for himself. David's gaze swept across the lobby, his eyes locking with one employee after another before he addressed the entire room. I founded this bank 20 years ago, he said, his voice resonating with a lifetime of conviction. Because my own parents were denied a loan on the basis of their skin color, it seems nothing has changed. The very poison I built this institution to fight has infected it from within. He walked slowly toward the center of the lobby, the CEO's badge now held prominently in his hand. Every customer deserves the same respect, the same consideration, and the same fair chance, regardless of their race, how they dress, or whether or not they are the CEO. David turned to face Derek and Vivian, his gaze unwavering. Discrimination has no place in this country, and it certainly has no place in my bank. Eleanor stepped forward again, pointing a resolute finger at the disgraced pair. You have 7 minutes to collect your personal belongings, she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. All of you who participated in this disgraceful episode, security will escort you. Thomas, the guard who had tried to remove David just moments before, now stood at attention, awaiting orders from his true boss. Thomas, David said, his voice firm but not unkind. Please ensure that Mr. Thompson and Ms. Chen are escorted from the premises after they've cleared their desks. They are no longer employees of Meridian Financial. The young guard nodded, a mixture of shock and newfound resolve on his face. As Derek and Vivian stood paralyzed by the catastrophic turn of their day, David turned his attention to the young black couple still waiting patiently in the lobby. With the same dignified stride that had carried him through 1,000 boardrooms, he approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I believe, he said warmly. I understand you've been waiting to discuss a loan. I would be honored to review it with you personally. In that moment, history was being written, not just for Meridian Financial, but for the Johnsons and for everyone who witnessed this extraordinary act of accountability. The 7-minute countdown to Derek and Vivian's exit had begun, but the countdown to a fundamental transformation of Meridian Financial, and perhaps the industry itself, was just getting started. The The main conference room of the flagship branch had never been so full. Employees lined the walls, packed together in a stunned, silent congregation. Scarcely 40 minutes had passed since they'd witnessed the unthinkable, their own CEO, in disguise, exposing the rot within his own company. Now, every single person from the branch, tellers, loan officers, managers, and maintenance staff, gathered as David Gaston stood at the head of the table. The disguise was gone, replaced by an unmistakable aura of authority. Behind him, a large screen displayed the Meridian Financial logo and its founding mission: financial opportunity for all communities. "Thank you for assembling on such short notice," David began, his voice grave. "What happened today was a profound failure, not just of individuals, but of our culture, our training, and our core values." Eleanor stood beside him. With a few keystrokes, the screen behind them flickered to life, showing footage from David's hidden camera. "Before we discuss what comes next," David continued, "it is essential that everyone understands exactly what transpired. This will be difficult to watch. It should be difficult to watch. We cannot fix what we refuse to acknowledge." For the next several minutes, the room sat in a deeply uncomfortable silence, watching Derek Thompson's casual cruelty play out in high definition. The dismissive posture, the condescending tone, the blatant attempt to push a bad loan, and finally, the low-life comment that had sealed his fate. The footage was interspersed with split-screen comparisons, showing how white customers had been treated in that very same hour. The contrast was stark, damning, and undeniable. Some employees looked away in shame. Others seemed genuinely shocked, as if waking from a dream, suddenly aware of the poison that had been flowing around them unnoticed. When the video ended, David let the silence hang in the air. "This was not an isolated incident," he stated. "We have received 17 formal complaints about this branch in the past year alone. I've spent this morning reviewing denied applications from the last 6 months. The pattern is indefensible." Eleanor stepped forward. "As of this moment, Derek Thompson and Vivian Chen have been terminated for cause," she announced. Additionally, James Harrington, the security supervisor who created the protocol allowing customers to be removed for simply asking for a manager, has also been terminated. A murmur rippled through the room. Eleanor raised a hand to silence it. "Let me be clear," she said. "This is not the end of our response. It is the beginning." David moved from behind the table, walking slowly among his employees. "I built this company to be better," he said, his voice thick with disappointment. "Today, I learned we have failed. The same discrimination my parents faced is happening right here, under our own name." He returned to the front of the room, his expression hardening with resolve. "Starting tomorrow, we are implementing sweeping changes across all Meridian branches, beginning with this one. Every single employee will undergo enhanced fair lending and sensitivity training, not the check-the-box videos you're used to, but intensive, real-world simulations." Eleanor advanced the slide. "We are also launching a nationwide mystery shopper program," David explained. "Testers of different racial backgrounds with identical financial profiles will apply for loans at every one of our branches. The results will be published internally for all to see." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "And before this day is over, I will personally review every loan application denied by this branch in the last 3 months. Any that meet our actual standards will be approved immediately, with an apology call from me." Eleanor switched to the final slide, which displayed a quote from the bank's founding charter. "Banking must be an equalizer, not a divider. Capital must flow based on merit, not privilege." "These are not just words," David said, pointing to the screen. "This is our purpose. And starting today, we will live up to it, or we will fail trying." As the shaken staff filed out of the meeting, David and Eleanor remained, ready to answer any question, to calm any fear. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, David's car pulled up to the small convenience store where it had all begun. By a remarkable coincidence, or perhaps it wasn't a coincidence at all, the same 2 men whose conversation had sparked this entire journey were sitting inside, discussing their financial troubles. David approached them and extended a hand. "Excuse me, gentlemen. My name is David Gaston, CEO of Meridian Financial. I couldn't help but overhear you here yesterday. I would like to personally review your loan applications, if you'd allow me." Their shock gave way to cautious hope as David explained what had transpired. An hour later, both men had appointments at his executive offices for the following morning. The journey that began with a single overheard conversation had become a crusade. The disguise was gone, but the clarity it provided would remain, shaping every policy, every hire, and every loan decision from that day forward. If this story of justice and accountability moved you, we invite you to subscribe and share it so that its lesson may travel further. We'll see you in our next video.